Liberalism is an anti-fragile system. This is why it's so hard to defeat liberalism. What is anti-fragility? Anti-fragility is distinct from obviously weakness, or fragility, I should say. It's distinct from strong, or to stick to the language used in the theory, robust systems. An anti-fragile system is able to take chaos and benefit from it. I'm sure you've all heard the saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? That's a very common saying. But that saying itself is sort of describing what anti-fragility is. There is a problem in a system, but this problem isn't actually a problem for the system. It becomes a sort of point in which the system can exploit that point in order to strengthen itself. And it just keeps doing that. So anti-fragile systems tend to be the best systems because anything you throw at it, it's able to absorb and make it its own. Neoliberalism is very, very good at this. Particularly, it's good at doing this with anti-capitalism. Now, before I get into that, I want to explain why neoliberalism is anti-fragile. I think it has something to do with the fact that neoliberalism incentivizes profit. Now, when you incentivize profit, in part, you do incentivize the desire to solve problems or make it your own to benefit from. Now, obviously, I don't believe capitalism inherently solves problems. As a matter of fact, it often will create problems in order to gain profit because, as Veblen points out, if the main goal is profit, the best way to do that isn't always producing quality goods. It's creating artificial scarcity. So that way demand increases, therefore price increases, therefore profit increases. It's not inherent to capitalism and liberalism to be productive, but it is inherent to exploit issues to the end of gaining profit from it. So this is sort of built into the system of neoliberalism, which is based off the pecuniary gain for private shareholders, owners of large businesses, etc. That's probably a big part of it. There's probably more that I haven't thought through well enough yet, but I can confidently say that's a big, big part of it. So what are some examples of this? Well, I believe it was Mark Fisher in his essay, Capitalist Realism. He lamented on the fact that a lot of left-wing activism ended up becoming absorbed by neoliberalism and used as a tool to neutralize anti-capitalist sentiment. Now, what's an example of this? Well, a lot of leftists who are anti-capitalist, they sort of ended up making a career out of being anti-capitalist, ironically. Anti-capitalism became about what you consume. Do you listen to anti-capitalist music? Do you watch anti-capitalist films? Do you wear anti-capitalist themed clothing? Do you buy anti-capitalist themed books? Anti-capitalism itself became a thing that could be marketed, and the left ate that up. You're seeing a similar thing today with right-wing discourse. Everywhere you look, you see slop all over Twitter. You see someone trying to sell you something, a course, you name it. Now, in part, that's not surprising, especially on the case of being an individual, because if you're an individual and you are a right-winger, you are entertaining and playing with, at least for a very long time, dangerous ideas that could get you fired from your job. So you're gonna have a heavy incentive to find an alternative source of income in order to sustain your career or your ability to speak freely about topics you believe in. So now we're seeing a sort of basic sterilization of that spirit. I guess you could call it a revolutionary spirit, or at least it was for a time. It's becoming absorbed into the anti-fragile system of neoliberalism, just as left-wing activism did. And this is how all these revolutionary sort of sentiments are conquered over time. They become part of the system. I'm not a communist, but there is a Stalin quote that is very relevant to this issue. He said, "Will the revolution conquer the system, or will the system conquer the revolution?" It usually seems to be the latter, and that's increasingly happening. I mean, there hardly ever was anything resembling a revolution. There was just a sort of revolutionary sentiment that existed that was seen across social media. Who knows how much of that was curated artificially? That's another conversation. But it does seem to be doing that. Now, when you're confronted with this fact, you may say to yourself, well, it doesn't seem like we can escape this, because it seems like anytime we try to throw something at the system to shatter it, it's somehow able to absorb it into itself and grow. So, is there a way to resist anti-fragility? Is anti-fragility only applicable to liberalism? Or two big questions. So I guess I'll start with the second question first. No, anti-fragility isn't only explicitly part of neoliberalism. There have been other anti-fragile systems that have existed, in particular developmental states. I believe fascism, for its 23-year history, was an anti-fragile system. And in some sense, that was limited in its anti-fragility. It was destroyed. But if you actually look at the history of Italian fascism, you'll see a sort of developmental dynamism within the state, right? There was a sort of laissez-faire period, but this was in service of a more socialist period, all the way to like a hyper-socialist period in the end. And you even had stuff like this with America at the time in 1933 with the New Deal with FDR. So you had a similar sort of thing going on at one point. There seems to be in history this sort of oscillation between greed and cooperation. See, when I say socialism, I would consider myself a right-wing socialist. It's not on the basis of equality, it's on the basis of harmony and cooperation as a good in themselves. But you see there's a sort of oscillation between those two things. So how do you actually defeat an anti-fragile system? This is the million-dollar question. The first step is to be conscious of the fact that it's an anti-fragile system. You need to have that awareness. Because if you don't have that awareness, it's so easy to get absorbed into it. You won't even realize it happened. That's how this keeps happening. It becomes commodified, it becomes a product, it becomes something that's fallen far from what it was, but over time without you realizing, because its outer appearance seems to be the same. So you need to be aware of this fact in order to defeat it. And the only way to defeat it is to resist commodification. How do you resist commodification? Well, it has to stay authentic. In some sense, you have to make sure what you're doing isn't profitable in the sense that it can profit a single individual without giving any benefit to others. Because maybe a single individual does profit, but then he's benevolent and uses that for the good of the movement, insofar as there is an actual movement. You need to have a consciousness of anti-fragility in this particular context. You need to make sure you're not going to get commodified and sucked into it and just become another node in the system. But I will say this, and this is a little bit of optimism. A lot of people are very aware of the grifter issue. It's because it's so obvious, it's so on its face, part of just taking activism or just a revolutionary spirit and basically pacifying it into a product that can be consumed. People are really aware of this, more than they were before. So there is a sort of good calling out of, you're a grifter, this is slop. So that's good, it's a start. It's better than not knowing that. And I think that sort of sentiment just needs to become stronger and stronger and stronger if we want to actually get anywhere and not just become a conquered thing. That's very important. And that's really all I have to say on this issue. And I'm sure the people who watch my videos are very smart and creative people, and I'm sure you guys can probably come up with something as well to add to what I've said. And I'd be interested to hear anyone else's take on this issue, and really more specifically, anyone else's take on how we can get around this issue.